And welcome back to the LewAllen podcast. We cover sports stories, newsmakers, and difference makers in our community and across the state of Michigan. And my guest today is former Congressman Dan Kildee. He served 12 years in Congress, had years before in the nation's capital working for his uncle as well, Dale Kildee, who served for decades in Congress representing Flint, Genesee County, Bay County, and the area there. It is a pleasure to have Dan Kildee join me today to talk about his time serving in Congress and also in his native Flint, and what's next for the congressman who elected to retire and not seek a seventh term. Congressman, welcome and thank you for the time today.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
So we're going to cover a number of topics, but let's talk first about that time in Washington, serving terms in Congress representing Flint, your hometown, and the surrounding areas there. You made a decision to not seek re-election for a seventh term, and now you've had some time away, time back home, maybe a great opportunity to reflect on the time that you did serve our nation.
Well, first of all, the decision to leave, interestingly enough, was made before I even arrived in Congress. I had a very serious conversation with my wife when we first decided that I would run for Congress, and we decided right then this was not going to be one of those deals where I'm elected and I stay in this position for the rest of my life. It was intended to be a season of my life, a part of my career, and so the decision to leave, while it was partly precipitated by my cancer diagnosis, it was kind of already in contemplation. Now, it's been an interesting period of time. One of the conclusions that I've come to is that even though I didn't know it at the time, my timing was pretty good. The Congress that I left just in January is even a different Congress now. I mean, the environment in Washington, as toxic as it had become, is worse than I've seen it. It's the worst I've seen, in my adult lifetime. And so my decision to come home was mostly a personal decision, but it also gives me a chance to do the things I want to do to work to support my community in the ways that I believe make the most sense and in the spirit that I bring to the work. And I'll be honest, it was not going to be so possible for me to do that in the spirit that I bring to the work when the spirit of the place itself is so desperately broken. So I'm hopeful that changes. I think there's a way for us to encourage that kind of a change, but it's going to take some time.
And you said that was an angrier Washington that you left than when you arrived. We hear more hyper partisan. We hear talk all the time from politicians about bipartisan, working across the aisle, things of that sort. In reality, how much of that is there even in today's Congress, the Congress that you left?
Yeah, there's not enough. There is, I will say, there is enough to remind us of that possibility. And when I was there, even in the later years of my tenure in Congress, I still was able to find common cause with people that I might disagree with on one subject, but that we come together on another. Michigan, our Michigan delegation, for example, seems to always come together when it comes to protecting the Great Lakes, the greatest natural water source, freshwater source in the known universe. But those moments are fewer and fewer and farther between. And so I'm frustrated by that. And I think partly because the change that I've seen, it is that there's more anger being expressed. But there's something even more fundamental that I see invading political dialogue. And that's this belief that a difference of opinion is tantamount to deciding between good and evil, where opponents in a debate don't just see their opponent as misguided or wrong in their view, but sees them as the source of evil. And the truth of the matter is, the diversity of thought, the disagreement, the argument is not a demonstration of dysfunction. That's the highest form of functionality in a democracy. But where it breaks down is that differences and disagreement are not celebrated in a democratic society, but they're used as evidence of failure. And I think that's just the wrong frame. And the business that you and I both have spent our lives in collectively have contributed to that, the way people in positions of leadership behave, and also the way the more spectacular sort of flashy objects in the political space attract the attention of news media. And the conversations like the one you and I are having don't happen often enough, the more thoughtful conversations.
And do we even listen to each other? I mean, you mentioned the whole good and evil aspect of feelings or approach. Isn't a big part of serving and furthering democracy listening? Isn't that critically important?
It should be, because none of us are blessed with perfect intelligence and all the information we need. I see it, and when I was serving in Congress, sitting in these committee hearings, members of Congress come and go, only sitting there when it's their time to say what they want to say, not sitting there listening to a good idea that might come from somebody on the other side of the aisle, or even somebody that they disagree with within their own party. So listening is important. It's what the framers intended, was to get all these different points of view under one roof. In fact, if you look at the construct of the Constitution, the construct of the House and the Senate, they are designed to get every possible perspective, every remote possible perspective together under one roof, not with the idea that we take turns talking, but that we actually enter into dialogue. Listen, maybe there's an idea coming from somebody on the other side of the aisle or on the other side of the country that might make sense, but you never know that if you don't pay attention, if you don't listen.
You're a Democrat. We're elected as such, but your reputation is that you were willing to listen and to talk with others. That was important to you then, and it's important to you still to this day?
No question. I mean, I'm a Democrat, but the way I have tried to explain that, and the reason that this is a good way to answer your question, is that, yeah, I'm a Democrat, but I'm a guy from Flint. I'm a drummer. I'm a golfer. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I'm a grandfather. I'm a whole bunch of things before we get to the fact that I also happen to be a Democrat. We can find commonality in the way we define ourselves if we don't limit ourselves to that one label. And I think that's the mistake that I see. And it's true when I was in Congress, but it's true when I'm walking up and down Saginaw Street right here in my hometown of Flint. There are people I disagree with on all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. But we have so much more in common than we have that divides us. We tend to focus only on those differentiating characteristics rather than the things that we have in common. And we do this in our families, for sure. If we do it in our communities, we ought to do the same thing in the halls of government. But there's something that has happened that somehow has created this permission structure where once you get in a position of public authority in an elective office, you somehow feel like all the lessons that your parents taught you growing up don't apply to that environment. Treat people with dignity and respect. Be kind. Don't prejudge. The stuff my mom and dad taught me, they weren't preparing me for politics. They were preparing me for life. Mm-hmm. Those life lessons are not somehow suspended when we get into public decision making. They're more important there than any other place. But for some, and I'm curious about your thinking about how have we evolved to the point where we think once you walk into a legislative body that everything your parents taught you gets to be set aside. I don't understand that.
To me, it just seems like the attraction of power is what drives so many in elective politics today, and that wanting power, wanting to hold on to power, trumps all, if you will, using that word.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's at the core of what we're looking at today, plus the external forces, and whether it's cable news or social media now, which allows that to be driven to individuals who may be of like minds in that way.
Yeah.
I think that's some of the issue.
I think it is, and I think the obsession with power is a big part of it. But I also think based on 47 years since I was first elected to public office, so I got a lot of experience in this space. It's the power to do what? The power to exercise power is what seems to attract a lot of people, because I think there's more power in collaboration, in compromise. There's more power to do bigger things, even if that power has to be shared. So when I hear that, because I think you're precisely right, it's this obsession with power, but it's power for its own sake, not the power to do good. If people were more obsessed about the power to do good, I think they'd quickly come to the understanding that there's so much more good that can become accomplished when we are willing to compromise, when we are willing to collaborate, or we're willing to listen to somebody else's idea and think maybe it would be a better idea than mine. That's real power, rather than just the sort of the narrow power for its own sake. And so I do think we need to challenge some of these folks to think differently about the fact that collaboration is not a sign of weakness. Compromise is not the sign of weakness. It's actually a way to be stronger.
Former Congressman Dan Kildee joining me today on the Dave LewAllen podcast. Thrilled to have him with us. And to that end of trying to change some of that in politics, and we're going to get into this a little bit more, but you're assuming the role of endowed chair of the Griffin policy group at Central Michigan University, your alma mater, my alma mater as well. You'll teach young students, college students, the art of politics, if you will, leaning on your years of experience. I want to get more into that. And you'd mentioned it earlier, hope that may be fixing this. I mean, can this be fixed in the body politics, particularly in Washington, D.C.?
I think it can be, but it's going to take time, and it's such a change that it's going to require us to think really long term. I'm not sure that the current generation of political leaders are going to ever get the will to change the way they do business. Now, we can push them, we should, and we can try to get them to do better. But I think real change is going to require a real investment in what we call civic health. Mm-hmm. And that is the extent to which people see themselves in the public debate, in the public conversation, contributing at the public square to our community dialogues or to our national dialogues. To me, that starts in the grassroots. It also starts with these students that you mentioned. I decided to accept the offer to become the Griffin chair, mainly because I see most of the hope in the coming generations who are, what we're learning about them is that they tend to be less partisan. They don't think about the party label as much as they do issues that drive them. I see that as encouraging. It's partly because people of that age are turned off by the politics of the day. But if we can take that and turn it around so that it doesn't push them away from politics, because that's really been the effect, but it actually reminds them that perspective that they have is an important and valuable perspective. That lack of adherence to partisan labels is a positive thing. Doesn't mean they shouldn't have that label, but it shouldn't be number one on the list of self-definition. It should be like number 20 on the list of self-definition. And to me, my chance to go into the classroom and interact with students who are interested enough in the subject to sign up for this class, that means we have hope. And if I can just instill in them a belief that their voice matters, and help them get tools. This is really what the education's about. Help them get the tools to take that orientation that they bring and that refreshing orientation they bring into the public square. Then I will have succeeded in this work.
This is a 3-year term, the Endowed Chair, the Griffin Chair, the Griffin Forums. You'll teach a class, at least one each semester, and there are Griffin Forums twice a year as well. I had the pleasure of moderating the Spring Forum with you and your longtime friend Jim Ananick, also from Flint, the former state senator. Those are important opportunities as well to bring people together to talk about where things are and where maybe things can and should go in political circles.
For sure. I mean, the connection between the classroom work and we haven't yet concluded precisely how we're going to frame the forums, but it will very much be oriented toward this subject that we've been addressing. How do we use that opportunity to show that these differences that we have in our society, these differences of opinion, are born out of our different life experiences? We all come to this place we're at through a different path. And if I leave anything behind with this CMU experience, it's helping to add to the body of thinking out there through the classroom work and through the forums, that our differences are to be celebrated. And we ought not demonize one another. If we can somehow get more people taking part in the political conversation that don't hate one another or are not given this permission to treat one another as if they're evil versus good, then it will have been worth it all.
Yeah, definitely worthwhile. And I applaud you for taking on that assignment. And the students, as you say, will be the ones that can benefit from your years of experience, certainly, and those that you also bring to campus to join you in that effort.
One thing, if I could just add to that.
Sure.
One thing I think it's important to point out is that what I'm describing doesn't mean a person has to minimize their passion around an issue. And in fact, I think it creates space for people to be as passionate and as forceful as they want to be. But in a society like ours, in a democratic society, we made an agreement. Part of our social contract is that we take those passions into a process that is intended to result in a common path forward. That doesn't mean minimize your passions. It means bring your passion and commit yourself to a process of reconciliation of the various points of view. But bring your best argument. Fight hard. But do so in a way that recognizes you don't get to have your way or it's the highway. You live to fight another day. You sharpen your argument. You do a better job. You get better data. You become more persuasive rather than just simply say, I'm good, you're bad, and that's the end of it.
Well, and you experienced some of that firsthand, January 6th, sadly, in the insurrection, which I don't care where you land on that issue, dark day in American history, for sure. You were one of the last lawmakers in the chamber. You experienced that, the threat of physical harm, the mental health, challenge that results from it, undergoing an experience like that. Day like that had to make you think that not only was this institution that you cared for so deeply was coming apart, that the entire country was coming apart.
Yeah, it was a moment that, of course, I'll take with me for the rest of my life. As you mentioned, I was one of the last to leave because I was, along with about a dozen other lawmakers and an equal number of members of the Washington Press Corps, we got trapped in the gallery of the House of Representatives. Then there was no way out when they evacuated us. So it wasn't until after that gunshot was fired and one of the insurrectionists was actually killed that there was enough space for us to escape. It affected me. I didn't realize it at the time, but it affected me over the next week or two in a way that required me to seek treatment for the post-traumatic stress that I experienced. And I was very public about that because, I was a social worker. I was the chair of our community mental health board. I've always preached that we should treat mental health the same way we do physical health and destigmatize it. And suddenly here's an opportunity for me to sort of practice what I preach. And so I was very public about the fact that I went into regular psychotherapeutic treatment from a psychiatrist whose specialty was trauma, because I wanted to encourage other people who might not have had quite the celebrated traumatic experience that I had, but still carry those invisible wounds, to help them feel like they can get help as well. But that was that was one of those moments that could have gone either way in our country. And I think the jury's still out, literally and figuratively, as to which way it goes. I had hoped that would sort of break the fever. It didn't quite work out that way. So I think the rest of that narrative is yet to be written. And that's one of the reasons that I feel so passionate about trying to encourage people to think differently about what the political differences really represent. It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing.
All right, let's pivot to your other current job. We mentioned the CMU Griffin chair position. You returned home to Flint, your native city, take over the Community Foundation of Greater Flint. And you're a grant-making organization. Tell me about this position and how this will allow you to continue to serve the community that is your home.
Well, first of all, I love the organization. I love the job. And the fact that I was given this opportunity when I did is something I'm really grateful for, because it feels very much like all the best parts of the job that I had when I was in Congress. Exercising leadership, trying to get people who disagree to come together, convening people with different points of view to try to solve local problems, and then delivering resources. Like, one of the things we do, for example, in the Community Foundation is give small grants to neighborhood-based organizations. It's our neighborhood small grants effort. And these are really small grants, just a few $1,000s, sometimes a few $100s. Coming from Congress, that sounds like this would be nothing. The effect of these dollars going into block clubs and neighborhood associations is really profound. And so I get a lot of satisfaction, even though it's on a different scale.
Right.
The scale for the people that I represent right here at home is really significant. So I feel like I've been able to erase the worst parts of the job that I once had and focus on the good parts of it. And that's what the Community Foundation does. We deal with issues of racial inequity, of health inequity, of food, issues, access to healthy foods, neighborhoods, cultural efforts here, community violence reduction. Like, a lot of the stuff I was working on in Congress, I get to do here. The difference is it's a 12-minute drive to my house. Yeah. I don't have to fly to Washington twice a week back and forth in order to do this work.
Well, you've got millions of dollars in assets as also in order to work with and to award. Tom Gores, a Pistons owner, another Flint guy, Flint native, has taken on a large role in terms of one of the funds that you help coordinate and award grants from. How important is that to, along with all the other funds that you manage, in order to make a difference in Flint?
Giving somebody like Tom Gores, who knows that much of his life he owes to the people of our community, and he's willing to give back, puts us in a position, like, for example, with the dollars that he's provided, to support the Flint Promise, which is our way of supporting people who otherwise would not have a chance at a college education to actually see it through. What Tom saw and what we are doing with his resources is believing that there's some kid out there with a great idea, but that idea may never happen, may never come to fruition if they're not given the skills and the tools they have to be the best version of themselves that they can possibly be. What Tom recognizes and what our Community Foundation works on is this understanding that we all benefit, all of us, if those kids out there are given a better shot, a better trajectory in their lives, it's not just good for them and their families. They might be the next Tom Gores with a great idea, a $1 billion idea. Yeah. And so now, for most of them, it might not be a $1 billion idea. They're just going to be a better neighbor, a better worker, a better family person. But once in a while, there's somebody who has somebody else see possibilities in them, and bingo, it can make all the difference in the world. And I think I'm grateful to Tom for his continued support for our work, because without him, fewer kids would be going to college, and this is a good thing.
And as I understand it as well, the Flint water crisis, which was, horrific for Flint and for the residents there, that really got him engaged and wanting to make a difference. That's a fight that you've been involved with, the federal level, to get the lead pipes, water pipes out of Flint as well, has been an issue to some degree, certainly remains an issue in your community as well.
It is, and the water crisis was a warning to the rest of the country. The Flint case helped establish really a new focus on clean drinking water. But I think what's often forgotten is that when the moment of crisis is over, that doesn't mean that the effect of that crisis is suddenly gone. So a lot of our work is focusing on following the people who've been impacted by the water crisis, the health impacts, the economic impact, the reputational impact that our community suffered, and continuing to try to solve those challenges and solve for those problems. The thing that's unique about Mr. Gores is that he didn't just help when the crisis was in the headlines.
Yes.
He decided to see it through. And so part of my challenge is to go back to a lot of those folks who were definitely there for Flint when we were in the middle of it and we were on every front page, and remind them that their help at that point was really appreciated. But if we're going to actually be true to ourselves, we got to see it through. We got to make sure the kids who are most impacted, those very young children, have all the help they need to be the best version of themselves that they could have been, not just despite the crisis, but in some ways, because the crisis has allowed us to garner all these resources, give these kids a better shot than they otherwise would have had. We don't want to get Flint back to where it was before the water crisis, because that wasn't a good place to be. Mm-hmm. We want Flint to be in a better place than it was before the crisis occurred.
All right, we'll wrap up with a couple of more things. Big picture. I mean, we mentioned, you're a Democrat. White House, Republican, and Congress controlled by Republicans at this point. Some would argue that the Democratic Party is in disarray with no clear path going forward in terms of leadership and the like. Now that you're removed from it, half a country away from D.C., if you will, what's your viewpoint on the Democratic Party, and are there standard bearers out there for the future for that party?
Yeah, there are, and I think our job is to lift up that next generation of leaders. I was pleased that Hakeem Jeffries became the Democratic leader in the House of Representatives. He's the next generation of leaders. He's thoughtful. He's not a bomb thrower. But I think the role that the Democratic Party has to play in this moment is not just to be the opposition to what President Trump and Republicans are proposing, but to offer our alternative views where we disagree, to not just say no, but to offer our suggestions as to how to solve these big problems and leave open the possibility, and I think this is a real possibility, that the current Republican majorities in the House and the Senate have such diversity of thought that they actually can't get anything done without a Democratic partner. We saw this in the last Congress. Unfortunately, the willingness to negotiate a bipartisan solution tends to be like, the rescue. Yeah. It should be the operating system. But I do think that the the Speaker of the House has such slim majorities and has a few people who are really not willing to try to get things done, that ultimately Democrats have to leave open the door, even though it might not be something Republicans want to take right now, behave in a fashion that leaves the door open for a bipartisan conversation, because I do think that's going to have to happen in the near future.
And finally, we mentioned at CMU, one of the classes that you'll be teaching is Michigan politics and helping students learn about our systems of government and so on and so forth. Michigan will have a gubernatorial race already underway for 2026 as Gretchen Whitmer terms out as governor in the state. There are a lot of candidates already in the field, including an independent in Mike Duggan, the mayor of Detroit. Look into your crystal ball. What do you see early on as this campaign ramps up?
Well, this is going to be perhaps the most interesting gubernatorial race that I've seen in a long time, because Mike Duggan's running as an independent. Yeah. It's yet to be clear where he'll draw his support from. Will it come equal parts from moderate Democrats and Republicans who are looking for an alternative to sort of the partisan frame? And how wide is that lane? That's really the unknown variable that's going to, I think, determine the outcome. The other part of it is that we have two conflicting phenomena that is also part of the backdrop. One is that typically the off-cycle is better for the party who doesn't have the White House. So that would argue that Democrats would be in a better position. But look at the history of Michigan governor's races. You have to go back to the early 1960s to find a Republican being succeeded by a Republican in a normal election, or a Democrat being succeeded by a Democrat in a normal election. Our pendulum tends to swing back and forth. So we have all these variables that lead us to one big conclusion. We have no idea how this thing's going to turn out, which is going to be fun for people in the news business, not so much for people in the business of politics.
Yeah. Well, but what food for thought and what conversation it will allow you as you begin your first semester in the fall as the Griffin chair at CMU. Congressman, thank you for the time today. It was a pleasure to be with you in Mount Pleasant this spring, and I look forward to staying in touch with you. Wish you good health and all the best going forward, and congratulations on your years of service, but also on coming home and continuing to serve the residents of Flint. We thank you for your time today.
Thank you. I look forward to talking again soon.
All right, very good. Former Congressman Dan Kildee joining us on the Dave LewAllen podcast today. Enjoy the conversation. If you enjoyed it as well, give us a like, subscribe, share this with those in your network as well. We are on YouTube, also Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Until next time, we thank our producer-director, Josh Bowen, and most of all you for watching and listening to the Dave LewAllen podcast. Stay safe, be kind.